Welcome to New Release Review, part of the Movie Friends podcast. My name is Seth. Today we're talking about The Bikeriders from 2023, directed by Jeff Nichols. We will be discussing spoilers throughout this entire episode, so if you haven't seen The Bikeriders, really I don't know what you're doing with your life. You've had time by now to see it. Go watch the movie and then come back and finish listening to this. My guest for today is Raf Stitt from the Canon podcast. Raf, how are you?
I'm swell. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. Very excited. I had joined you on your show for another movie about greasers.
Yes. It's a theme for us now. It's kind of our thing.
We talked about The Outsiders, which is one of my favorite Coppola films and one of my favorite films growing up, really. If you guys haven't listened to that episode, definitely go check it out. I liked that conversation.
I feel like we crushed it. Not to toot our own horns too much, but we kind of smashed it. I don't think there's ever been a better podcast conversation about The Outsiders. And I feel like a lot of people are saying that. There's a lot of chatter.
I think we almost did The Outsiders better than S.E. Hinton and Francis Ford Coppola.
Exactly.
Yeah. The Bikeriders, you saw it. When did you see this?
I saw this last night, which, as of this recording, would be Sunday evening.
Very cool. What were your kind of initial thoughts?
Initial thoughts, I don't want this to sound critical, but I was expecting more just like dudes on the open road riding bikes. Mm-hmm. But what we got was a lot of yearning at all different kinds, which I thought was pretty cool. It definitely wasn't the movie that I expected, but I did end up digging, the direction that it went in ultimately. I was very pleased. There are a lot of great faces in terms of just like cool actors who pop up in this movie between, Michael Shannon, who everyone loves, Mike Faist, who was just in Challengers, which was a awesome movie that had a lot of buzz around the interwebs. Jodie Comer, just like a ton of like really cool people who, I kind of went into the movie a little blind. I wasn't really, privy on any reviews or reception. I didn't even know the director's name going into it. It was just like Austin Butler, Tom Hardy are two cool performers who I enjoy. This seems like a cool concept, watching guys on motorcycles. I will go see that movie, and I was pleasantly surprised. I really, really dug it.
Yeah, I tried to go into this as blind as possible. I did not watch any trailers or previews. This was like a long road to get to theaters.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I can't really remember all the details of why. I just know that it was like, is it going to streaming or is it not being released at all? Or which I don't understand, because this is a really great story with really great performances. But this was supposed to come out like over a year ago, I think.
Yeah, there were a ton of delays on this.
Yeah. Throughout that whole thing, I managed to stay away from any details. And then like right before I went in, I saw someone say, oh, The Bikeriders is The Godfather mixed with Easy Rider. And so I was like, no, I don't want any kind of outside influence on my viewing. And then as I was watching it, I was like, this is kind of like The Godfather mixed with Easy Rider.
That's so funny. So I was able to avoid a lot of first impressions, and the opening scene to me was, oh, this is kind of Goodfellas, but in the Midwest instead of, the Italian mob in New York City, we're just going, Midwestern bike gangs. And I think it kind of strays away from that as the movie goes along, which, is good. Don't try to replicate Goodfellas, but I was kind of interested to see if the movie would have gone that way. And I think I would have enjoyed that as someone who, I think we spoke about this a bit when you came on to my show, but we're both guys from like the New York City suburbs. So Italian mobsters and just like Italian American, influence and culture is something that we kind of like grew up around, whereas Midwestern sort of these like Americana 60s to 70s kind of biker gangs were never something that I had any familiarity with. It's always something that I've been interested in. You know, I've been meaning to watch Easy Rider for the longest time. I have Hunter S. Thompson's Hell's Angels on my bookshelf that I, haven't picked up yet. So it's something that I'm interested in, but not something that I've been like totally familiar with in any real way. So this is my first sort of like look into that world. I totally dug it. I can see the appeal, all across the board, from the movie to like the lifestyle to everything else.
It was interesting, that opening scene. We get like tough guy Austin Butler, and we get like a little bit of a fight, and that's what I was expecting, And then we get the freeze frame of him about to get the shovel to the back of his head, and I was like, oh, is this movie going to be funny? Because this is really funny. I feel like any movie past like 2016 that does the freeze frame into, well, I bet you're wondering how I got here. They have to know how funny that is, know? And so I was pleasantly surprised, especially with Cockroach, the character Cockroach, just always talking about eating bugs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime that dude was on screen, I thought he was pretty funny. I thought Tom Hardy had some pretty funny-ish lines, and Jodie Comer, obviously. I know people have a problem with how she speaks in this film. I didn't have a problem with it at all. I thought some accents in America are very strong and very, very peculiar, not peculiar, weird, but like particular. And so I bought it right away. I guess people thought that she was like the worst part of the movie, but I don't know. How did you feel about her? And then Kathy, the character of Kathy. And
so I think the accent part is really interesting, because I was kind of thinking today about movies about different cities and areas of the US. And I would say it's kind of similar to like something like The Departed, where that's a movie that takes place in Boston. And if you're from Boston, or if you've been around Bostonians and that kind of accent, you would think that all of the acting in that movie is ridiculous and no one in the city actually sounds like that. And I could see that being similar for people from, Chicago, Illinois, the whole sort of just Midwest region, Milwaukee. Is Milwaukee in Wisconsin, or is Milwaukee in Minnesota? I don't know. Either way.
That's a good question.
I can totally see someone from that region being offended by the extreme that they took that accent to. But because this is a movie that is to be consumed by people from all across the country, it sort of makes sense to dial that up to 11, so that the rest of us can kind of understand who these people are, what their accent is like, what some of the tics are. I think she says, a lot after sentences. So, me personally, because I'm not from there, I wasn't offended, but I could see why someone from that region would find her offensive. If people just didn't like the accent, even if they're like not from Chicago, I think, sort of just like get over it. To be a little frank,
right?
That's what movies about these different areas and peoples are supposed to do. It's supposed to like give us some insight into who they are, what their cultures are, even if that means dialing some of the things and aspects of it up to a degree that might not be real in real life, but works cinematically.
Right. This is somewhat of an ensemble film. Somewhat. We definitely have three main characters. Do you think of Kathy as a main character or the main character?
Oh yeah, absolutely. She's our entire window into this world, right? So going back to the Goodfellas reference or analogy or whatever, she's our Lorraine Bracco character. She's how we get into this world of Bikeriders. I was going in kind of expecting that Austin Butler would be a much more prominent figure as the main character, but everything that we see is sort of like through the lens of Kathy, and I did really enjoy that. It could have gone a few different ways. It could have been, our window could have been the writer character, the Mike Faist character, where it's just him consuming everything that Kathy tells us, and then him like regurgitating that to us as an audience, but instead the audience is kind of aligned with him, whereas like she is the one who is telling us the story, and that's how we consume it and understand all of these dudes and their weird world that she ends up getting totally wrapped up in. I really dug it. I thought it was cool to center the movie around her.
Yeah, it was smart to include Mike Faist's character, because then it's not Kathy talking to us. Like, it's not someone talking from the past or talking to the screen. All of the narration makes sense. Like, it's people are so anti-narration, which I've never understood. I don't get why. Who cares, you know? Like, but this way they don't have to have a narrator. It's just her talking to another character, so it explains away why there's narration. I thought she was really, really good. Yes, her performance, because of the voice that she's doing, is a little like larger than the other performances, and that was maybe my only. I don't want to say like problem with the movie, but just something that I noticed was like, at times it felt like Austin Butler and her were so in sync, and then at times it felt like they were in different movies. And same thing with Butler and Tom Hardy. Sometimes they are in sync with each other. You know, when they have their first conversation where Tom Hardy is talking about giving him the club, it is like so intense. And then when they have the conversation outside the bar, when Austin Butler's like, it's not me, it's never been me, I'm not, you know, I'm not, and then he leaves right after Cockroach's house. That felt off. Like, it didn't feel like they were kind of like lining up with each other. But I still think that it's all very good performances. Mike Faist, for the short amount of time that he's in it, I was like, I don't know if I'm just having like residual Challengers feelings for Mike Faist, but I was like, he's great.
Yeah. He doesn't really like offer much in this movie, but I'm like, Mike Faist, what a guy. And I think it's the same thing, just leftover feelings from Challengers. You know, every time he popped on screen, like some of the Challengers music would play in my head.
Sure.
Even though it didn't fit the vibe of Bikeriders at all.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I loved the soundtrack to this. It wasn't like all late 60s or even like 50s popular rock and roll pop hits that we kind of associate with that era. All of the music fit, but it wasn't like, oh yeah, it's a jukebox movie where I know all of these songs, and here, oh, they're playing Lollipop, and oh, they're playing Leader of the Pack. So I appreciated that, because it, at least for me, it didn't take my brain to a place where I was associating the music with like memories of my own life. Yeah. It just kept me in the movie. But I don't know, maybe you recognized every song.
No, actually quite the opposite. I didn't recognize a lot of the songs, and to me that felt again like I was being transported into this world that I otherwise had no exposure to, which was really cool. Everything, all of the music felt of the time, of the place, of the characters, and you know, maybe not necessarily like matching their mental or emotional states within a particular scene, but definitely like enhance the overall vibe of the movie and gave me what I thought was a better understanding of, okay, what is it like to be a dude who's really into Harleys in the late 60s? And I feel like the music just 100% enhanced my understanding of that world, even though they weren't songs that I, you know, had any familiarity with before the movie. But it's also a cool way to like, I can check out the soundtrack now, and, you know, maybe that exposes me to other sort of like biker adjacent music, like rock and roll from that era that I otherwise like wouldn't have been listening to. So I thought the soundtrack was great. Yeah.
The only song that I recognized, and it's a cover, is as they're standing there when the bar is burning, that they burn down. It's playing a cover of Bob Dylan's Masters of War, and it's very scary. I mean, that's already an intense, dark song. The cover of it, it's an interesting cover that they chose, because at the volume that they're playing, I feel like the melody isn't instantly recognizable. Like as the scene was going, I was like, is this Masters of War? Like, but if you know that song, it makes that scene like so much scarier.
Interesting.
And
how so?
Yeah. Well, because Masters of War is like a real indictment of the rich and powerful and the hell that they unleash on Earth by waging war. And so like you get Tom Hardy standing there and like the police and the fire department won't even put out a fire. And so it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, this guy's like the devil, basically. Tom Hardy as Johnny. I love that we start out with, oh, Johnny watched this movie
Yeah.
and was just kind of like, that's cool. And then decided to, turn the racing club into like a motorcycle club. I don't know about you. And like, I don't think that this detracts from the story at all. So I want to be careful like how I say this, but for me, I just couldn't take any of the biker club stuff seriously because I was like, they're tough, they're dangerous. Like I get all of that, but you're literally inventing a club as if you're like 8 years old. And it's like, what do? Well, we ride our bikes around and then we go to a field and wrestle and eat and drink. And that's what you do.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
So for like as a social thing, that's fine. But as a like we're tough, cool guys, I'm like I don't take you seriously.
Yeah, I found all of that really interesting because you sort of go into it thinking, or at least I did, when it went into it thinking like, okay, this is going to tell me about how all of these biker gangs came to be these like insane drug runners and things like that. And I was thinking it makes sense that the movie is called Bikeriders, not like the bike gang or whatever, because it really is just about a bunch of dudes who found each other because they all have this shared interest of riding Harleys around town. And, a lot of times we think of bike gangs and these bike clubs as like these big, scary things that, have caused so much harm and violence across the country, when really a lot of it was just like a bunch of silly dudes who wanted to find some sort of bond with other dudes, right? Like this guy was sitting at home watching TV with his wife and 2 daughters, which I feel like is a pretty important thing to know for his character. And he was like, I just want to like talk to other guys who like to ride bikes around, and maybe we'll drink a couple beers and like roughhouse with each other. It really taps into this really almost primal aspect of like male bonds. Like,
Sure.
I think back to like some of the earliest bonds that I have, and it's like, oh yeah, me and these guys like to kick this ball around, and then we go and drink sodas first as a kid, and then beers as you get older together, and that's basically it. And like that's what these guys are doing, and it's kind of silly, but it's also kind of in some ways kind of beautiful that they're able to find that in a world that otherwise doesn't have room for them.
I agree with everything that you said. Like, because we're on this side of the 60s and 70s, we go into a movie about a biker gang expecting all of this stuff. And then it goes through all the characters, and it's just like, yeah, this guy is married with kids and he's a truck driver and he maintains his job the whole time. And, Benny is quiet and weird. And it's not until they start growing in numbers that they start to do like dangerous or violent things. And then it's not until Johnny is killed that they start to do like serious drug running and things like that. And if they did, the movie doesn't include any of that prior to Johnny's death, which I'm very curious if in real life that was true, or if they were trying to, for the sake of the story, maintain this big distinction in the audience's mind of like, well, yes, they're violent, but look, they're only violent to people who are trying to hurt them or trying to get in on their stuff. They're not evil people who are dealing drugs. Oh, these guys are dealing drugs. They're the real bad guys. And I thought the biker gang of 4 children, they showed how those kids started out as like criminal kids stealing hubcaps.
Yeah.
and busting headlights, and they're inspired by the bikers to become bikers, but they're coming at it from a different place than Johnny and Benny and all of that, like first generation.
Yeah. I found the storyline, the sort of subplot of those kids to be extremely fascinating. And it does kind of answer the question of, because as you watch the movie, you're like, okay, well, this is just a bunch of dudes with like nice girlfriends, and some of them have jobs, who like to ride their bikes around town. How does that then jump to my understanding of what these biker gangs are and did eventually become? Where does those kids, they sort of like bridge that gap? And it's not really, I guess it kind of is stated explicitly of how that comes to be, but it was interesting that that distinction was made, that a lot of these, I'm sure, even if we go back to like the Hells Angels and like their inception, it was probably just a bunch of dudes who liked riding bikes together. And then eventually down the line, because it does attract people who are seen as undesirable in other aspects of life or society, that is how it then jumps from just guys hanging around, maybe drinking too many beers, to we're involved in serious crimes now.
Yeah.
And so I thought that whole like the subplot with that kid was maybe the best part of the movie.
Yeah. I kept thinking, I was like, is this like young Post Malone? Like, I don't think that I've seen that actor before, so I just kept thinking of Post Malone with no hair.
But he does look familiar.
Yeah, he looks like familiar. But then I was like, maybe I've just seen a bunch of kids like this guy around,
Yeah. The scene where his friends go to pick him up at his house and you get a glimpse into what his home life is like one of the most heartbreaking scenes. And again, they do a lot with that kid's storyline in a very limited space within the movie and the story at large. I think for me, Jeff Nichols, like that's some of his most impressive directing, is how he's able to very, very clearly within small spaces tell this extremely vast part of the story that is in many ways one of the most essential parts for us understanding the world of these biker gangs and like how we understand them to be now.
It's cool because it's close to a silent movie. That kid's segments,
Yeah.
But it's done in a way that I don't want to say he's always in the back of our minds, right? But we hate when a character seemingly just comes out of nowhere, and it's like, well, where's this guy coming from? Like, why is this guy important now? We're introducing him, late in the third act, and some kid just comes out of nowhere and shoots Johnny. Like, that sucks. So this way, it doesn't suck because he's throughout the story. We get all of these important details, like he's stealing hubcaps, he's in a bad home, he strangles his dad. Like, this is a serious guy. And then the few interactions that he has with the vandals, like he's always brewing underneath. He feels like a mix between Benny and Johnny.
Yeah.
Where like Benny just doesn't talk unless he absolutely has to. And, Johnny talks a little bit more. He feels like a mixture of those two characters. And it was some of my favorite stuff. Yeah, I agree with you. Like the stuff with that kid, I was like, man. And that's why, in the end, when he just whips out a gun, I'm like, dude, like, not that I disagree with that or didn't like it, especially if that's historically accurate. But I'm like, you suck, kid. Like, you're a total coward.
It makes so much sense in sort of like the beats that we've hit up to that point within the story, and his story in particular. Like that kid's story, you can like pull that from this movie and make a short film on its own, and that film makes total sense if you're just showing the four scenes that we have of that kid, and it ending with him pulling out a gun and killing Johnny. It sucks because you understand like that character and why he does that in that moment, and you also understand that it sucks because like Johnny, who has been a somewhat sympathetic character throughout the movie, meets like his obvious demise. When he's leaving his house and he's and his wife is like, "Are you coming home tonight?" You're like, "Well, I've seen enough movies. Like I understand what we're doing here, which isn't to say that that's a bad thing. Like I think if a movie understands the rhythm and beats of like basic narrative storytelling, it
Oh
still can be
yeah.
done effectively and hit with the audience. When that happens, you're like, okay, this sucks. Like Johnny's going to die tonight. But then you also understand what I've seen with this kid. He's probably going to pull out a gun because he's kind of a shithead and in it for all of the wrong reasons. And those two worlds will clash at the end. And ultimately, we will not be happy as viewers.
Right. Johnny is not like a good guy. Johnny's character benefits from the thing of, as an audience, the person that we see the most is just the one that we care about.
Yeah.
Like people get so confused where it's like, well, how could you show such and such a person in a sympathetic light? And it's like, if you actually watch it, it's not really showing them in a sympathetic light. They're just on screen a lot. And we're used to villains and monsters being withheld from our sight so that their impact is more intense, right? Johnny sucks, doing crime, being kooky and weird, but this kid sucks more. And he does what goes against the rules of the world that we're in, which is brings a gun to a knife fight and does not fight fair. And I was shocked. Like I was really shocked because when Johnny's farewell tour begins, with his wife and then going over to Kathy's house, you're like, all right, yeah, I get it. I know what's going to happen. But I didn't know the way in which it was going to happen. And so when he just pulls the gun out and shoots him, I was pretty stunned. There were some loud gasps in the theater.
Oh, wow.
But it's another good way of showing how time has passed. We start with fists and then knives and then guns, and guns, that's it. Guns beat everything, right? So it's like the biker gangs have entered into this new era that Johnny doesn't fit into, of treachery and deceit and shooting. And yeah.
I found the gun interesting also because just like as moviegoers, we have a basic understanding of like when certain things are meant to happen narratively within a movie, or how certain things happen just based on everything that we've seen. And when Johnny and the kid get into it outside of the bar, and the kid starts to reach either behind his back or like into his boot, it was like, oh, he's going to pull out a gun, because that's what people do in movies, right? They pull out a gun and they're shaky, and then Johnny will then, put the gun to his head and say, go on, do it, or something. Right. And the kid will, that, because that's how we've been trained to understand those moments in movies. But that kind of bait and switch, at least for me, I found interesting because it plays into what you're saying, where like the progression of we're starting at fists, then we're going to knives, and then we're going to guns. And that is like what pushes Johnny out, is that his inability to really like keep up with the times. Also just being super like in way over his head. Like he was originally a guy who saw a movie with Marlon Brando and was like, I want to hang out with my friends at the bar, and is then running this cross-state organization of people doing God knows what. So it's kind of both of those things coming together at the end for Johnny's ultimate demise.
Yeah, the drowning nature. I think Tom Hardy plays it so well. I mean, not that Tom Hardy hasn't been good recently, because I think he's pretty much always good, but having so much time with him and seeing him be so intimate and so violent and so cruel and cool, it was such a treat. Like I was like, oh my God, Tom Hardy, are you the best actor working today?
I thought it was great after like a weird run of like Venom movies and that Capote thing that he did with Josh Trank, and other movies where his face is shielded, even going back to the memes of him in the Dark Knight Rises and Dunkirk, where he's just like grunting behind a mask. And then here we get to see him, like you said, like show this great range, show this like very layered performance and like extremely nuanced performance, where you're like, oh yeah, Tom Hardy has the juice. Like, he can do this. He can provide really awesome performances and tap into something extremely special, even if he is doing a silly voice along the way. Like, this is why all those years ago we were all, buying Tom Hardy stock, because we thought that these were the heights that he could reach. And
Right.
it was really cool to see him, get back to that in a way that we maybe haven't seen him do over the last couple of years.
Yeah, one of my favorite scenes is after Johnny goes to Benny in the motel, and he's like, "Hey, it'd be really good if you could come to this bike ride in a few weeks. Yeah, just think about it." And then Kathy goes to see him at the bar, and she's just like yelling at him, and he looks at her, and he's like, "Are you done?" And what I appreciated about this movie was the performers are able to take very simple language and make it feel like monologues that are written by, Hollywood writers. But if you look at the actual words that they're saying, they're not using like big flowery language. Not that the characters are dumb. I don't think that they're dumb, but they talk like real people. And it felt like a tense confrontation that you would have between two people who love the same person and are fighting for, the attention and time of that person. Yeah, I love that. I wrote that down in my notes. I was like, Tom Hardy rules. Are you done? Yes, you're. And then he says, like, yeah, you're done.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
That scene is great and really reinforced what I was feeling for most of the movie leading up to that, which was what I said at the top, which, this is just a movie about yearning. Everyone, seeing Austin Butler and being like, God, I need him. I need that guy. It's Kathy's opening moment in the bar where she sees him. It's Johnny's entire character is just like trying to get to Benny. And I don't know if we want to take this dive or if it's necessarily there or if it's just me like reading into it too much, but I think Benny's like disdain for women could be read in some ways as being like there's slightly homoerotic undertones to the movie, especially his yearning for Benny. But I think even, if you don't want to look at it that way, like I think that there is a very clear sort of like this guy kind of hates women, and he is a dude who is in a marriage with two daughters, and he probably wants some sort of like male companionship in ways that he hasn't been able to feel it. And when he sees Benny, he sees like the ultimate form of that, and he will do anything in his powers to like keep whatever relationship with Benny it is that he can have. And then on the flip side, you have Kathy, who's just like, that dude is so hot. I gotta be around him because he's beautiful.
Yes.
There's a lot of other yearning that happens in the movie, but I think that is definitely the strongest form of it is Kathy and Johnny specifically just like going after the Benny character.
Right. Yeah, I definitely think that Johnny does love and have feelings for Benny. I don't think it's the other way around because ultimately Benny rejects all of it and he leaves everybody behind. Johnny says to Benny, "You're the guy that everyone here is pretending to be." And I can't remember verbatim how he says it, but when he says that, it's like, you're also wanting to be Benny, like Johnny. You have a job and you have a family and you have kids. Benny, like, God knows what he has, and he just loves to ride. Like, that's the only thing that he cares about. And I think that Johnny is definitely, perhaps unconsciously, in love with Benny. I don't know if he knows it or not. But that scene after the picnic where he's just like in his face. Yeah, it's very intense. And it's intense in this really complicated way where it's not all sexual tension.
Mm-hmm.
There's like violent tension there too. I feel like Johnny is so pitiful in that scene because he's like trying to present this thing of like, hey, I want you to take over the club, to a guy who is like almost missing a foot. And it's because he's drowning. It's because he wants Benny close. Benny can do the things that he can't do. Benny is the person that he can't be. It's very, very complicated. And I think that those scenes will be included in both of their Oscar reels one day.
Absolutely.
And the way, like, I took note of the way that it's lit. You know, you have that one street light that's coming down on the two of them, and how Tom Hardy moves like in and out of it. And as the camera moves little bits, they're either just completely dark with like little halos, or you can see parts of their faces. It's scary. It's intimate. It's an incredibly well acted scene and well shot scene. It's great.
It's definitely the scene of the movie. It's the most intense scene of the movie, and in a way that can be felt by the audience. It's one of those scenes where sort of the air is sucked out of the room when you're in the theater, because everyone is just sort of on the edge of their seat, not because something tense is going to happen, but because the emotions and feelings that the two characters are expressing towards each other, really just Johnny towards Benny, are so strong. And the way that it's lit really just, is only going to enhance that in the way that it's shot. And in moments, it looks like Johnny is going in to kiss Benny, but then we get like a cut where it's like, okay, their faces are actually this far apart, and sort of that confusion and the shadows around what Johnny's actual intentions are kind of unclear, in the same way that like the space between them physically is unclear. And all of that stuff is just like, maybe Nichols has a little bit of the juice here. In ways that you don't see necessarily throughout the rest of the movie.
Yeah. And it's plays into this whole stunted boys riding bikes thing where Johnny is saying to him, it's yours, take it. He's asking him in a way, but he's depending on Benny to take the lead. He's depending on Benny to take charge. And Benny's just like, no, like I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to make the first move. I'm not going to take control. I'm not going to wrangle it from you. It's pretty great.
It's interesting because I am so focused on this yearning aspect of the movie. And I guess in a sense, Benny, the only thing that Benny wants or yearns for is to ride his bike. But throughout the movie, it is like really unclear what he wants out of life. Like, what makes him tick? What is his motivation? Is he really in love with Kathy, or is he just, there because it's a relationship to have? Does he love the bonds that he has with these other people, or is he just there because they also like bikes and they wear the same jackets? Like there are a lot of moments within the movie where it's called into question what it is that Benny actually wants deep down. And I think some of the only moments of joy, like pure joy, that we see from him is just when he's riding his bike. But it's, even with that, it's not fully clear that that is all that he desires out of the world. You could maybe argue that the ending is reinforcing that's all that he wants, with the sounds that he hears and the way that he looks off into the distance and sort of smiles. But to me, it was still kind of unclear. I don't know if you thought that there was some sort of like clear distinction for him in that regard.
Yeah. So we've kind of been talking about him-ish, but like Austin Butler as Benny, I think that he's doing great work here. There are some things where it feels like pull back on the smoldering staring from underneath your brow just a touch, just a little.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to summon that like 60s movie star sort of vibe.
Right. It's like, you can be a person, you don't need to be this thing. But I didn't love staring off into the distance and hearing the motorcycle sound that much. I don't think that we need to go that far to like actually hear what he's hearing in his head. I think that we could understand it. Kathy throughout the film talks about how she's never seen Benny cry. And when Benny finds out that Johnny is dead, he comes back and he breaks down and he's crying. I think that where Johnny might be conscious of his feelings for Benny or he might not be, I think that Benny is just completely closed off. And Kathy says, like, he has no emotions. Like, what is this guy? What's wrong with this guy? And I think it's like until it's too late, like he doesn't realize until it's too late how he actually felt. And once Johnny's gone, he never rides again. We don't get an explanation of, oh, he didn't ride again because, you know, he swore off the Vandals, but it's just like that time period is kind of closed, kind of like how we were talking about how the motorcycle gangs jump from one time period to another, like one era to another, symbolized by the death of Johnny. Like a miniature version of that happens in Benny's life. So with Johnny gone, Benny has to kind of close off those parts of himself. So now he's dead enough that he can like live a normal suburban life, because all of the things that were freedom and like an alternative lifestyle to him are gone through Johnny. So I don't think that we need to read like too far into it to see that they were in love with each other. Even if one of them was a sexual romantic love and the other one was just like a brotherly leader type of love where he looked up to Johnny.
Almost paternal, but not quite. Yeah. Very much so unrelated to the relationship between Benny and Johnny and their deep love for each other. Another aspect of my favorite aspect of this movie, the yearning that is felt by so many characters, right? We spoke about it with Benny. I didn't necessarily use the word, but I think it's very apparent that the kid character who ends up killing Johnny is also has a deep yearning for some sort of belonging and purpose within life. But I thought one really, really interesting example of that was the Michael Shannon Zipko character and the monologue that he gives at the picnic, you know, by the fireside, where he's talking about how he really wanted to join the army and go fight off in Vietnam, and they designated him or labeled him as an undesirable candidate. And that particular monologue, that character, the way that Shannon performs it really, really hammers home the point that a lot of these guys were really just looking for some sort of belonging wherever they could find it within the world, within society. And this bike club was really, for all of them, it was the only place where they could find that. It's a very small moment. Well, not a small moment, but it's a short scene within the movie, but I think it really does hammer home and shine a light on something that is like super crucial to understanding this world of guys who join these bike gangs or these bike clubs. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Michael Shannon and that monologue.
Yeah, and same for Michael Shannon. Like, it was very cool to see him in this film. You know, for the majority of it, he's in bits and pieces. Some of his stuff is more comedic, you know. And then it's like, all right, hand Michael Shannon the mic for a bit. We're going to literally like dim the lights and everyone's going to sit around and like listen to him. And he just delivers this monologue that it feels like a side quest, but you're like, oh my God, that's right. Michael Shannon is amazing and able to just turn the entire movie towards himself for a few moments. And also everything that you thought you knew about this character, you actually didn't know. And for us, again, like on this side of this time period, you know, to hear someone crying because they couldn't go to Vietnam is like such a wild thought.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. It's pretty amazing. on that note, I wanted to mention Norman Reedus. I haven't seen all of The Walking Dead. I watched like a few seasons and then I was just like, I'm done, you know.
That's the big question that like, I feel like I asked that question at parties. That's like my first question to get to know someone. When did you stop watching The Walking Dead?
I read The Walking Dead when it first came out.
Oh, nice.
The graphic novels. Yep.
Yeah.
And it was such an interesting concept when it first came out, which was, you know, Rick will stay. And this was in, you know, like the introduction in the very first issue was like, Rick will stay. Other people will kind of come in and out, but we're just going to stay with this character forever, basically. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh, this is like an interesting way of doing this. And I was into the TV show for a bit, but then I was like, I'm all right, whatever. Anyway,
got a little tough. Just looking for supplies.
I do like Norman Reedus. I would be, you know, all in on him being Ghost Rider just to keep him on motorcycles forever, you know?
Yeah. Very, very fair point.
And I appreciated his teeth in this movie, you know?
Yeah.
I really liked how far they went with...
Thank you, makeup team.
Yeah, his character, Funny Sonny, and how sinister he was, and when he reveals like why he's actually out there, for the rest of the movie, I just didn't trust him.
Yeah.
Like I was like, oh, like, are you just like a sleeper agent and you're waiting to like kill everyone here and then ride off into the sunset? Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I appreciated his small part in this too.
His character is great. And a lot of the other sort of smaller characters are great because they offer some comedic relief. They offer some cool insights into the world and like the kinds of people who you'll meet. And again, I can't tell if it's that they actually are sympathetic characters or if it's just that we're spending a lot of time with them. But, you know, at first, this cockroach guy, you're like, this is the dumbest guy in the world. He seems like a total piece of shit. And then by the end, you know, you're totally feeling for him. And then some of the other guys, you know, they're wearing like Nazi memorabilia and patches and you know, signs on their jackets and stuff. But you're like, oh, these guys are such goofballs. Like, I can't help but just sort of enjoy their presence whenever they're on screen. And the Reedus character, at first you're thinking, oh, this guy is so sinister, but then he ends up also being a huge goofball and hanging out with the crew. And you're like, I can't put a finger on what it is with any of these guys. Like, am I to trust them? Am I to feel for them? Should I feel sympathy towards these kinds of guys, or are they not worthy of that kind of sympathy? Which, you know, I don't know if this was necessarily the intention of the movie, but it does in many ways sort of maybe a little bit rewire our brains in terms of how we, you know, judge certain books by their covers. And not to say that biker dudes have been a marginalized group within this country or within society at large, which I guess we don't really have to say at large because they don't exist outside of the US. It's a very uniquely American thing. But like, still, like, you know, we should offer these guys the sort of like charitability of trying to understand like where it is that they come from, what it is that makes them tick, what their deepest desires and whatnot are, despite what we might think about them based on, you know, a first glance or preconceived notions that we may have had. Again, I don't think that was the intention of the movie, but I think it does sort of help to serve that purpose in some ways.
Yeah, I think that every story is worth being told. Genuinely, I think that every person's life, if you got a good storyteller, could tell that person's story, and every person's story is worth hearing. And so in a way, we don't need to hate or love these people, but we can hopefully understand them and be a little bit more educated in where they came from and what we understand about them. We catch a glimpse at one of the car shows of an all black biker gang. And I was like, I need the Bikeriders too. I need like,
where's the book on those dudes?
Well, yeah, I was like, please, like, are we gonna? I was like looking around, like, does anybody else see this? Like, are we gonna move on? Like, what's that story? You know, like, because that's like now you're taking like two marginalized groups and putting them together. Like, that's even more interesting. So, you know, Jeff Nichols, if you need an idea,
there you go. There's your sequel. There's
I would love to.
The bike riding cinematic universe.
Yeah, absolutely. And like even like some of the ladies in the game, I was like pretty interested, and I was like, what is going on here? Because Kathy maintains this like distance, you know, where to her it's all just silly and ridiculous, and she admits like, yeah, you know, like you start to talk like them a little bit, but she's not one of the, you know, back in the day we would have said a biker chick, right? She never moves into like that territory like we see some of the other ladies. So I was curious about some of them too. But whatever we got. Well, the story that we got is good. I'm curious if this will start a little trend of biker movies.
Yeah, or even just like interest within that sort of world. I feel like if it's not one that you're really tapped into, it's hard to find the stories, right?
Yeah.
I think on the front end I mentioned like some of the big pieces of media around this world, but I can't really think of like too many other things that are getting into this. So there might be a trend of,
well, it's like
more
Challengers.
movies.
You know, when Challengers came out, people were like, oh yeah, tennis movies. And then you look at the list of tennis movies and you're like, wait a minute. Not that many tennis movies. But
I've been playing so much tennis recently.
Yeah.
So much.
Well, as I was watching
Tire Town.
As I was watching the Bikeriders, I was like, maybe I should get a motorcycle. And then that one character dies because someone backs up into him. And I was like, I ain't getting a motorcycle. And then throughout the whole film, I'm like, please put a helmet on. Like, oh my God, guys, please.
I was thinking the same thing. And then I was like, oh my, this is why I'm not in a motorcycle gang. Because I would be the guy who's like, all right, everyone, I got us matching helmets. Right. You can put all your little Nazi stickers on them and whatnot.
Right.
We'll ride around town, but we'll be safe doing it.
I saw a guy in real life driving the other day. He was riding a motorcycle. He had on a leather jacket, but he had Crocs on. And I was just like, dude, if you wreck, your feet are gone. Like,
absolutely.
A Croc is doing nothing to save you. A Croc is actually like going to surrender. It's going to jump off and run away before you even hit the ground.
Did he have them in sport mode at least? That's one little
thing. He did not.
Oh, wow. He was really reckless.
He was, he just hopped on ready to go.
If anything, that's the most like rock and roll thing that you can do,
I guess. All right. Well, Raf, thanks for joining me. Where can people find you online?
Online, people can find me. I'm all around. I'm on Twitter. I'm on the Letterboxd machine. I'm on Instagram if anyone wants non-movie related content, but I'm not sure why anyone would want to follow me there. I'm on Blue Sky as well. I barely post there, but my handle on all of those platforms is at Raf Stitt. It's all one word, RAFSTITT. You can find me there, mostly chatting about movies. Sometimes on Twitter, I do tend to be a bit of a sports bro, but we'll get some movie takes mixed in there as well. If you want all movies, no sports, Letterboxd is probably the place. You can also find me writing for Screen Age Wasteland. Great website. We've got a lot of stuff over there. They're the ones who host the Canon podcast, so to speak. We will be releasing new episodes pretty soon. You can also find the Canon podcast and Screen Age Wasteland on Twitter and Blue Sky and all of that's good stuff as well. So many places to find me if you want to hear more of my yapping about all things movie and non-movie related.
Awesome. Very cool. Definitely find him where you can and give him a follow. thank you very much for joining me. Really appreciate it. And the next movie that I find that has anything to do with greasers, maybe I'll have you on when we do Grease, on the show.
Can't wait. Grease was a huge movie in my household.
Oh, really?
We had like the songbook for the piano and everything.
Wow,
although
nice.
Growing up, me and my sisters were all terrible at piano. So my parents had to listen to all of us trying to, play the music from Grease. And they were like, maybe we'll just put it on the movie instead. So
nice. All right, cool. All right, it's a plan. Yeah, if Michelle can ever twist my arm enough to do Grease, because I hate that movie, but I'll keep you in mind.
I'll sub in for you.
That's even better, actually. Yes, even better. Well, thank you very much for listening. Send us an email. Let us know what you thought about the Bikeriders, motorcycles, Crocs, Grease, anything like that. moviefriendspodcast@gmail.com. We'd also love it if you would rate and review the show wherever you are listening. You on Overcast? You on Podcast Addict? Maybe you're just on Spotify. I don't know. Hey, wherever you're listening, we'd love it if you give us a rating and a review. In this day and age where we are bound by the shackles of AI and algorithms that no one understands, the only thing that seems to help is getting ratings and reviews. And so I'm here on bended knee, begging with all of the yearning in my sad little boy heart, begging for you to take those fingers of yours and rate this show whatever stars you want. If you only have 3 stars in your heart for me, that's okay. I will accept it. I will actually be really sad. Please don't do that. You can also support the show, patreon.com/moviefriendspodcast. $5 a month gets you access to all of our additional shows, our patron-only Discord, and you get to vote on upcoming episodes and monthly themes. Wow, that's crazy. And you can find the show on Twitter and Instagram, Movie Friends Podcast. We would love to talk to you. That's all we want to do. So reach out. Let us know. Anyway, thanks, Raf.
Thanks for having me. This was an absolute blast. Always a pleasure chatting movies with you. Only movies about greasers, though.
That's right. We have to stay in that theme. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, have a good one.
Movie Friends is produced by Seth Vargas and Michelle Rubenstein. Music by Anthony Vicora. If you like the show, please subscribe and give us a rating. It really helps us find new friends. Thanks.